The pregnancy test trembled in my hands as I stared at those two pink lines. After 3 years of trying, Josh and I were finally going to have a baby. I remember running to find him in the garage, tears streaming down my face as I held up the test. His wrench clattered to the floor as he swept me into his arms, both of us crying and laughing at the same time. "We did it," he whispered into my hair. "We're going to be parents." I couldn't wait to share the news with my family. My younger sister Rachel had been struggling with infertility for 5 years. She and her husband Mark had been through countless treatments, heartbreak after heartbreak. I thought maybe our joy could bring some light into her world, show her that miracles do happen. The family dinner was perfect. Mom had made her famous lasagna, and everyone was gathered around the table. My parents, Rachel and Mark, my older brother David and his wife. I stood up, my hands shaking with excitement. "Josh and I have something to tell you all," I began, my voice barely containing my happiness. "We're pregnant." The reaction wasn't what I expected. Josh squeezed my hand as silence filled the room. David was the first to react, standing up with a huge grin. "That's amazing! Congratulations!" But as my eyes swept the table, I saw Rachel's face crumble. She pushed back from the table and ran to the bathroom. Mark followed, shooting me an apologetic look. "She's been having a really hard time," Mom said quietly. "The doctors said her chances are getting slimmer." My heart broke for my sister, but I also felt a flicker of frustration. This was supposed to be my moment. Our celebration. I pushed the feeling down, reminding myself how much pain Rachel must be in. When Rachel returned, her eyes were red, but she managed to smile. "I'm sorry," she said, hugging me tight. "I'm happy for you. I really am. I know," I whispered back. "I love you." But as we were leaving that night, I overheard Mom talking to Rachel by the front door. Her voice was low, urgent. "Don't give up hope, sweetheart. Sometimes God works in mysterious ways." I didn't think much of it then. I should have. The next few weeks were a whirlwind of doctor appointments, prenatal vitamins, and planning. Josh had already started converting the spare room into a nursery, and I found myself constantly running my hands over my still flat belly, amazed that our little miracle was growing inside me. Rachel seemed to be adjusting well to the news. She even offered to help with the nursery, bringing over paint samples and baby magazines. I was relieved that we were getting closer during this special time. "Have you thought about names?" she asked one afternoon as we sorted through baby clothes that some friends had donated. "A few ideas," I said, folding a tiny onesie. "Nothing decided yet." She held up a little blue outfit. "I've always loved the name Daniel. It means God is my judge." I smiled. "That's pretty. We'll definitely consider it." What I didn't notice then was how she'd started taking pictures of everything. The nursery progress, the baby clothes, even me. Her phone was always out, documenting what she called the pregnancy journey. I thought she was just being supportive, maybe living vicariously through my experience. I was so naive. At 12 weeks, we had our first ultrasound. The baby looked like a little peanut on the fuzzy black and white screen, but seeing that tiny heartbeat flickering made everything real. Josh cried harder than I did. "Would you like some pictures?" the technician asked, and we eagerly nodded. I made copies for the grandparents-to-be, and Rachel asked if she could have one too. "I want to put it on my fridge," she said with a smile that I now realize held more longing than I understood. But things started to get strange after the ultrasound. Rachel began showing up unannounced, always with some excuse, bringing soup when I had morning sickness, offering to help clean the house, wanting to feel the baby kick even before I could feel it myself. "She's just excited to be an aunt," Josh said when I mentioned feeling a little overwhelmed by her attention. Mom started acting differently too. She'd make comments about how the family was having a baby, not just Josh and me. When I corrected her, she'd wave her hand dismissively. "Oh, you know what I mean. We're all in this together." The breaking point came at our gender reveal party. We'd invited close family and friends to find out whether we were having a boy or girl. Josh's parents had driven down from Portland, and everyone was gathered in our backyard, waiting for us to cut into the cake that would reveal pink or blue inside. As I held the knife with Josh's hand over mine, I looked around at all the excited faces. Rachel was standing right next to us, her phone recording every second. She'd been filming everything lately, me eating, me walking, me talking about the baby. I'd asked her to dial it back a little, but she said she was creating a memory book for the baby. We cut into the cake together, and blue frosting spilled out. "It's a boy!" Josh shouted, lifting me off my feet and spinning me around while everyone cheered. But as the celebration continued around us, I heard Rachel talking to Mark in the corner of the yard. Her voice carried more than she probably intended. "A boy," she said, her voice thick with emotion. "Our little boy is going to be perfect." Our boy? I must have misheard. But when I looked over, Rachel was staring at my belly with an intensity that made me uncomfortable. She caught me looking and smiled brightly, but something in her eyes had changed. That night, after everyone had gone home and we were cleaning up, Josh found me crying in the kitchen. "Hey, what's wrong?" He pulled me into his arms. "This is supposed to be a happy day." "Did you hear what Rachel said?" I asked. "About our boy?" Josh frowned. "I'm sure she just meant as his aunt. She's probably just feeling emotional about her own situation. I wanted to believe him, but a cold dread had settled in my chest. Something was wrong, but I couldn't put my finger on what. The answer came 2 days later when Mom called and asked me to come over alone. "We need to talk," she said, her voice more serious than I'd ever heard it. I should have brought Josh. I should have hung up the phone. Instead, I drove to my childhood home, my hands shaking on the steering wheel, somehow knowing that my life was about to change forever. Mom was waiting in the living room when I arrived, her face grave. Rachel was there too, sitting on the edge of the couch like she was ready to bolt. The sight of them together, both looking so serious, sent alarm bells ringing in my head. "Sit down, honey," Mom said, patting the armchair across from them. I remained standing. "What's this about?" Mom and Rachel exchanged a look that made my skin crawl. They'd clearly rehearsed this conversation. "We've been doing a lot of thinking and praying about your pregnancy," Mom began, her voice taking on that tone she used when she thought she was being wise and spiritual. "And we believe God has a plan." "Okay," I said slowly, not liking where this was heading. Rachel leaned forward, her eyes bright with an emotion I couldn't identify. "You know how long Mark and I have been trying, how much we want a baby." "Yes, and I'm sorry you're going through that, but I don't understand what this has to do with my pregnancy." "Everything happens for a reason," Mom continued. "Maybe you getting pregnant isn't just about you. Maybe it's about giving Rachel and Mark the family they've been praying for." The words hit me like a physical blow. "What are you saying?" "We think you should give the baby to Rachel and Mark," Mom said, as casually as if she were suggesting I pass the salt. "They can't have children, but you can. You could get pregnant again." I stared at them, waiting for the punchline, for someone to tell me this was a sick joke. But their faces were deadly serious. "You want me to give away my baby?" My voice came out as a whisper. "Not give away," Rachel said quickly. "We'd still be family. I'd be his mother, but you'd be his aunt. You'd still see him all the time." "Are you insane?" The words exploded out of me. "This is my child, mine and Josh's." "Don't be selfish," Mom snapped, her mask of gentle spirituality slipping. "You have your whole life to have children. Rachel might not get another chance. So that makes my baby hers? That's not how it works." I was backing toward the door, my hand instinctively moving to my belly. Both women followed me, their voices overlapping as they tried to convince me. "Think about what's best for the family," Mom pleaded. "Think about Rachel's happiness." "What about my happiness? What about Josh? This is our first child." "You can have another," Rachel said, tears streaming down her face. "Please, I'm begging you. I need this baby." I literally ran out of that house and to my car, my hands shaking so badly I could barely get the key in the ignition. Behind me, I could hear them calling my name, but I didn't look back. Josh was in the nursery when I burst through our front door, painting the walls a soft blue. He took one look at my face and set down his brush. "What happened?" Between sobs, I told him everything. His face went through a range of emotions, confusion, disbelief, and finally, a cold anger I'd never seen before. "They want us to what?" he said when I finished. "Give them our baby. Like he's a toy we can just hand over." Josh pulled me into his arms, and I could feel him trembling with rage. "Over my dead body," he said fiercely. "That baby is ours, no one else's." But even as he held me, I knew this was just the beginning. The look in Rachel's eyes, the certainty in Mom's voice. They weren't going to let this go. I had no idea how far they were willing to go to get what they wanted. The harassment started immediately. Mom called every day, sometimes multiple times, leaving voicemails about how I was being selfish and breaking the family apart. Rachel started showing up at my work, cornering me in the parking lot with tear-filled pleas. "Just think about it," she'd beg. "We could do shared custody. I could be the primary parent, but you'd still be involved." "Rachel, stop," I said, trying to get to my car. "The answer is no. It will always be no. But I've already started preparing," she said, following me. "I've been taking prenatal vitamins too, so I can breastfeed him when he's born. I've been reading all the parenting books, learning about sleep schedules and feeding routines." I stopped walking and stared at her. "You've been what?" "I want to be ready," she said earnestly. "When you hand him over, I want to be the perfect mother from day one." The casual way she said when, not if, sent chills down my spine. She genuinely believed this was going to happen. Josh wanted to get restraining orders immediately, but I convinced him to try talking to Dad first. Maybe he could make Mom and Rachel see reason. That was a mistake. Dad listened to our concerns with a furrowed brow, nodding in all the right places. "I understand you're upset," he said finally, "but maybe they have a point. You are young, and you could have more children. Rachel's running out of time." "Dad, this is insane," I shouted. "You can't just redistribute babies because someone wants one." "I'm not saying you have to," he said, holding up his hands. "I'm just saying maybe consider it. For the good of the family." Even my own father had been turned against us. I realized then that this wasn't just Mom and Rachel's idea. They'd been working on the whole family, positioning themselves as the victims and me as the selfish daughter who wouldn't help her suffering sister. The next escalation came at my baby shower. Josh's mom had organized it, inviting friends and coworkers along with family. I'd hoped it would be a normal, happy celebration, a chance to focus on joy instead of the drama that had been consuming us. But Rachel showed up with a car full of presents, not for me, but for herself. She'd apparently told people that she was getting the baby, and several church members had brought gifts specifically for her. "These are for the nursery I'm setting up," she announced to the room, completely ignoring the shocked looks from Josh's family and my friends. "I want everything to be perfect for Daniel." "His name isn't Daniel," I said quietly. But Rachel acted like she hadn't heard me. She opened her presents with the same excitement I should have been feeling, oohing and ahhing over tiny clothes and stuffed animals. "Oh, this will look perfect in his crib," she said, holding up a mobile. I found the most beautiful crib at a consignment shop. Josh's mom, bless her, tried to redirect attention back to me. "Let's have the actual mother to be open her gifts now," she said firmly. But the damage was done. Several people were looking between Rachel and me with confusion, clearly not understanding what was happening. Rachel's behavior had been so confident, so natural, that some people seemed to believe she was the expecting mother. After the party, one of my coworkers pulled me aside. "I'm so confused," she said. "Is your sister adopting your baby?" "No," I said, my voice flat. "She's just having some emotional problems." But I could see the doubt in her eyes. Rachel's performance had been too convincing, too detailed. She'd talked about nursery themes and parenting plans with the authority of someone who'd actually be raising the child. That night, I couldn't sleep. I kept thinking about Rachel's confidence, her detailed preparations, the way she'd claimed ownership of my baby shower. This wasn't just wishful thinking anymore. She genuinely believed she was going to get my son. The question was, what was she planning to do to make that happen? At 7 months pregnant, I found out exactly what they were planning. Josh came home from work early, his face pale and his hands shaking. "We need to leave," he said without preamble. "We need to leave town, right now." "What are you talking about?" He sat down heavily at our kitchen table and pulled out his phone. "My buddy Mike works at the courthouse. He called me today with a heads up." My blood turned to ice. "What kind of heads up?" "Rachel and Mark filed paperwork yesterday. They're claiming you agreed to a surrogacy arrangement and now you're trying to back out." I sank into the chair across from him. "That's impossible. We never signed anything." "They have documents," Josh said grimly. "Forged ones, but they look official. A surrogacy contract with your signature, witness statements from your parents saying you agreed to the arrangement. But that's fraud. It's illegal." "Yes. But Mike says the judge who's been assigned to the case is known for being pro-family, especially when it comes to infertility issues. Rachel's lawyer is apparently very good at making sob stories sound convincing." I put my hands on my belly, feeling the baby kick as if he could sense my distress. "So what do? We get out of here before they can serve us with papers. Mike says once we're served, we'll have to stay in state until it's resolved. That could take months." The thought of my baby being born into this legal nightmare made me nauseous. We spent that night packing everything essential into our cars. Josh had called his parents in Portland, and they'd agreed to let us stay with them until the baby was born and we could figure out our next steps. As we loaded the last box, I looked back at our little house, the first home Josh and I had bought together, where we'd planned to bring our son home from the hospital. Rachel had stolen even that from us. We drove through the night, taking back roads and paying cash for gas to avoid leaving a paper trail. I felt like a criminal, fleeing in the darkness from my own family. But we weren't fast enough. The first sign that they'd found us came 2 weeks later. Josh's mom brought in the mail with a troubled expression. "This came for you," she said, handing me an envelope with no return address. Inside were recent photos of me walking to the grocery store, getting into the car, sitting in the backyard. Someone had been watching us. "How is this possible?" Josh said, staring at the pictures. "How did they even know where we are?" The answer came the next day when Josh's mom got a call from her sister. "Some woman called me asking about you too," she said. "She said she was with Child Protective Services and needed to verify your address for some kind of safety check." "CPS?" I felt like the walls were closing in. "Why would CPS be calling?" "She wouldn't," Josh said grimly. "That was Rachel, or someone working for her." We realized then that they'd been calling everyone in Josh's family, posing as officials and social workers, trying to track us down. And it had worked. The photos kept coming. Shots of us at doctor appointments, at the grocery store, even through the windows of Josh's parents' house. Whoever was taking them was getting bolder, getting closer. At 8 months pregnant, I was exhausted and terrified. Every shadow looked like a threat. Every unexpected noise made me jump. The stress was affecting the baby too. My blood pressure was dangerously high, and the doctor was talking about early delivery. "This can't continue," Josh said after I nearly fainted during a routine appointment. "This stress is going to hurt you and the baby." But we couldn't go to the police. What crime had been committed? Taking photos in public wasn't illegal. The forged legal documents were in another state. And Rachel's sob story about her infertile sister stealing her surrogate baby would probably get us more sympathy than us. We felt trapped, hunted, and the worst part was knowing that it was my own family doing this to us. Then, at 38 weeks pregnant, everything escalated in a way I never could have imagined. I went into labor on a Tuesday morning, 3 weeks before my due date. The stress and constant fear had finally taken their toll. Josh rushed me to the hospital while his mom called ahead to let them know we were coming. The labor was fast and intense. Within 6 hours, our son Daniel, yes, we'd chosen the name Rachel had suggested, back when I thought she was just being supportive, was born, all 7 pounds, 3 ounces of him, perfect and healthy in ours. But our joy was shattered before we'd even finished counting his fingers and toes. Mrs. Johnson, a nurse, appeared in our room doorway. There's a woman here claiming to be the baby's mother. She has legal documents. My blood ran cold. What? She's very insistent. She has what appears to be a custody order and is demanding to see the baby. Josh was on his feet immediately. No one sees our son except us. I don't care what papers she has. But it was too late. Rachel pushed past the nurse and into our room, Mark trailing behind her, looking uncomfortable. She was carrying a car seat and a diaper bag, dressed in a hospital gown as if she'd just given birth herself. "Where is he?" she demanded, her eyes scanning the room wildly. "Where's Daniel?" "Get out," I said, holding my son closer. "Get out right now. I'm not going anywhere without my baby." Rachel's voice was shrill, desperate. "The court says he's mine." A security guard appeared behind her, looking confused. "Ma'am, I'm going to need to see those documents." Rachel thrust a folder at him. "It's all there. Surrogacy agreement, custody order, everything. She's trying to steal my baby." My heart was pounding so hard I thought it might burst. Even through the postpartum exhaustion, I could see how official the documents looked. Someone had put a lot of effort into making them convincing. "I'm calling the police," Josh said, reaching for his phone. "Go ahead," Rachel said with a confidence that terrified me. "They'll just enforce the court order." But when the police arrived, something miraculous happened. The officer who responded was a woman named Detective Martinez, and she actually looked at the documents carefully instead of just accepting them at face value. "Ma'am," she said to Rachel after several minutes of reading, "this custody order is from Stevens County, but it's signed by Judge Williams." "Yes," Rachel said impatiently. "So? Judge Williams retired 6 months ago. He's not signing any orders." Rachel's face went white. Mark grabbed her arm, whispering urgently in her ear, but she shook him off. "There must be some mistake," she said, but her voice had lost its certainty. Detective Martinez looked at me. "Ma'am, did you sign a surrogacy agreement with this woman?" "Never," I said firmly. "I've never signed any such thing." "I'm going to need everyone to calm down while we sort this out," the detective said. "Sir, ma'am," she nodded to Mark and Rachel. "I'm going to need you to leave the hospital room while we verify these documents." Rachel's composure finally cracked. "No, he's supposed to be mine. I've been preparing for months. I have his room ready, his clothes picked out. I know everything about his schedule." "What schedule?" Detective Martinez asked. "The baby was just born." "I've been tracking everything," Rachel said, pulling out her phone. "All his appointments, when he kicks, what makes him calm down." "Look!" She showed the detective hundreds of photos of me, of my belly, of ultrasound images. The detective's expression grew more concerned as she scrolled through the images. "Ma'am, how long have you been taking these pictures?" "Since the beginning. I've documented everything for Daniel's baby book. I want him to know how much I loved him even before he was born." It was then that I realized Rachel wasn't just scheming to get my baby. She genuinely believed, in some broken part of her mind, that he was already hers. She'd been living in a fantasy world for months, and now reality was crashing down around her. Detective Martinez handed Rachel's phone to another officer. "I'm going to need you both to come with me to answer some questions about these forged documents." As they led Rachel away, she looked back at me with such hatred that it took my breath away. "This isn't over," she said. "He belongs with me." But for the first time in months, I felt safe. Daniel was in my arms, Josh was by my side, and the law was finally on our side. I had no idea that Rachel's obsession was about to get much, much worse. We stayed in the hospital for 3 extra days while Detective Martinez worked with authorities in our home state to build a case against Rachel and my parents for the forged documents and harassment. Josh barely left my side, terrified that somehow Rachel would find a way to get to Daniel. But on our last night in the hospital, something happened that made us realize Rachel's delusions had reached a whole new level. I woke up around 2 a.m. to feed Daniel and found Rachel standing by the window of our room. Not outside the window, inside the room, wearing scrubs and a hospital badge, holding a baby bottle. "Time for his feeding," she said calmly, as if she belonged there. I warmed it to exactly 98.6 degrees, just like the lactation consultant recommended. I screamed. Josh bolted upright from the chair where he'd been sleeping, and within seconds the room was full of nurses and security guards. But Rachel didn't run or resist. She just stood there, confused and hurt. "I don't understand," she said as they restrained her. "I'm his mother. I should be feeding him." The fake hospital badge was a work of art. It looked completely authentic. Later, We learned that Mark's brother worked for a company that made ID badges and had created it for her. Rachel had been volunteering at various hospitals for weeks, learning the layouts, memorizing staff schedules, waiting for the right opportunity. She's been planning this for a long time, Detective Martinez told us the next morning. The fake badge, the scrubs, she even had forged medical records showing she'd given birth to a baby matching your son's description. How far was she planning to take this? Josh asked. Honestly, I think she was going to walk out of here with him and disappear. We found a car seat in her car, along with a suitcase full of baby supplies and cash. A lot of cash. The thought of Rachel walking out of the hospital with my newborn son made me physically sick. If I hadn't woken up when I did, if she'd been a little more careful about not waking me, Daniel could have been gone forever. But the nightmare was far from over. While Rachel was being held on breaking and entering charges, my mother launched a new campaign. She started calling everyone we knew, Josh's employers, our friends, distant relatives, telling them that I was suffering from postpartum psychosis and making up stories about Rachel trying to steal the baby. She's always been jealous of Rachel. I heard her tell Josh's boss over the phone when he called to check on us. And now that she's had a baby, she's become paranoid and delusional. Rachel was just trying to help. The worst part was that some people believed her. Mom was a respected member of her church community, known for her volunteer work and sweet demeanor. I was the daughter who'd run away in the middle of the night with her sister's promised baby. Josh's mom had to change her phone number because of the constant calls from strangers telling her that she was harboring a kidnapper. Church members from back home started showing up at the house, wanting to pray over the situation and convince us to do the right thing. One afternoon, I was alone with Daniel when someone knocked on the door. Through the peephole, I saw a woman I didn't recognize holding a clipboard. "Child Protective Services," she called out. "We need to do a welfare check on the baby." My hands shook as I called Josh. Something about the woman seemed wrong. Her uniform didn't quite fit right, and CPS had told us they weren't investigating because there were no legitimate complaints. When Josh arrived with a real CPS worker an hour later, the fake one was gone. But she'd left something behind. A note slipped under the door with a photo of Daniel sleeping in his crib, taken from outside the window. "You can't hide forever," the note read. "Daniel needs his real family." That night, Josh installed security cameras around his parents' house and motion sensors on all the doors and windows. We were living like prisoners in our own lives, constantly looking over our shoulders, afraid to let Daniel out of our sight even for a moment. "This has to stop," Josh's father said after finding fresh tire tracks in their driveway that didn't belong to any of us. "We can't live like this." But Rachel had been released on bail, and the forged document charges were taking forever to process. Our lawyer said it could be months before she faced any real consequences, and in the meantime, she was free to continue her campaign of terror. That's when Josh made the decision that probably saved our lives. "We're going to court," he said. "We're going to end this once and for all." Filing for a permanent restraining order against my own family was one of the hardest things I've ever had to do. But our lawyer, Janet Harris, was confident we had a strong case. "The forged documents, the harassment, the breaking and entering, it's all documented," she said. "Plus, we have evidence of stalking behavior going back months." The hearing was scheduled for 6 weeks later. In the meantime, Detective Martinez had arrested 2 more people connected to Rachel's surveillance network, church members who'd been taking photos of us and reporting our movements back to her. The scope of the conspiracy was staggering, but Rachel wasn't going down without a fight. 3 days before the hearing, she filed an emergency custody petition claiming that I was an unfit mother and that Daniel was in immediate danger. The petition included evidence that I was neglecting the baby, using drugs, and suffering from severe mental illness. "How can she file for custody?" I asked Janet frantically. "She's not related to him legally. She's claiming that the original surrogacy agreement makes her the intended parent," Janet explained. "Even though we know it's forged, she's asking the judge to enforce it while the criminal case is pending." The night before the hearing, I barely slept. Daniel was only 2 months old, still tiny and helpless, and the thought of a judge potentially giving him to Rachel, even temporarily, was unbearable. But nothing could have prepared me for what happened in that courtroom. Rachel showed up dressed like she was going to church, her hair perfectly styled, carrying a baby doll that looked remarkably like Daniel. She sat in the front row, rocking the doll and whispering to it throughout the proceedings. When it was her turn to testify, she took the doll with her to the witness stand. "Your Honor," she began, her voice steady and confident. "I've been Daniel's mother since before he was conceived. I've documented every moment of his development, prepared for his birth, made every important decision about his care." She pulled out a thick binder filled with ultrasound photos, medical records, and hundreds of pictures of me during pregnancy. But the way she presented them made it sound like she was the one who'd been pregnant. "I attended every prenatal appointment," she said, showing the judge photos of me in waiting rooms. "I made sure he got proper nutrition. Photos of me eating. I documented his sleep patterns and movements. Photos of me napping or holding my belly. It was sickening." She'd taken innocent moments from my pregnancy and twisted them into evidence that she was Daniel's primary caregiver. But the most disturbing part came when the judge asked her about the surrogacy agreement. "Can you explain why your sister now claims she never agreed to this arrangement?" Rachel looked directly at me, her eyes cold and calculating. Pregnancy hormones can cause severe mental changes, Your Honor. My sister has always been unstable, but carrying a baby that she knew belonged to someone else broke something in her mind. She's convinced herself that Daniel is hers, but deep down, she knows the truth. The judge looked troubled by this explanation, and I could see him glancing between Rachel's composed demeanor and my obvious emotional distress. She was playing the part of the rational victim perfectly. Then Janet stood up for cross-examination, and everything changed. Miss Rachel, you say you attended every prenatal appointment. Can you tell me the name of your sister's obstetrician? Dr. Matthews, Rachel said confidently. Dr. Matthews retired 5 years ago. Your sister's doctor is Dr. Sarah Chen. You've never met her. Rachel's composure flickered, but she recovered quickly. I meant Dr. Chen. I misspoke. What was your sister's due date? The 15th of March. The medical records show the 8th of March. You're off by a week. Janet continued systematically dismantling Rachel's story. Despite all her stalking and documentation, she'd gotten basic facts wrong. She'd been so focused on the fantasy of being Daniel's mother that she'd missed real details about my pregnancy. But the moment that sealed Rachel's fate came when Janet asked her a simple question. If the judge grants you custody, what would you tell Daniel about his birth parents? Rachel looked confused by the question. His birth parents? Yes. What would you tell him about the woman who carried him and the man who contributed to his conception? I am his mother, Rachel said firmly. He doesn't need to know about the carriers. The courtroom fell silent. Even the judge looked shocked. So you would tell him that you gave birth to him? Janet pressed. I did, Rachel said, clutching the baby doll tighter. In every way that matters, I gave birth to Daniel. I chose his name, planned his future, loved him before anyone else did. His biological providers were just vessels. The judge leaned forward. Miss Rachel, are you saying you would lie to the child about his parentage? It wouldn't be a lie, she said, and for the first time, I could hear the madness clearly in her voice. I am his real mother. I always have been. The judge called a recess after Rachel's testimony, and Janet squeezed my hand reassuringly. She just destroyed her own case, she whispered. No judge is going to give a child to someone who plans to lie about their parentage. But I wasn't feeling relieved yet. Rachel was still in the hallway, rocking her baby doll and singing lullabies to it. Several people in the courthouse had stopped to stare at her obvious mental breakdown, but she seemed oblivious to their concerned looks. When court reconvened, the judge addressed Rachel directly. Miss Rachel, I've reviewed all the evidence presented today, including the documented harassment, forged legal documents, and your own testimony about deceiving the child regarding his parentage. Rachel stood up, still holding the doll. Your Honor, I know this looks bad, but you have to understand, I love Daniel more than anyone else ever could. I've sacrificed everything for him. What have you sacrificed? The judge asked. My job, my savings, my health, she said, her voice rising. I took prenatal vitamins for 9 months. I pumped my breast so I could breastfeed him. I studied every parenting book, learned infant CPR, baby-proofed my entire house. Everything I've done for the past year has been for Daniel. The judge's expression grew more concerned. Miss Rachel, the baby was born 2 months ago. How have you been pumping breast milk without having given birth? I induced lactation, she said matter-of-factly. There are medications, supplements. I wanted to be ready to feed him properly from day one. I felt sick. The level of Rachel's preparation, her absolute certainty that she would get my baby, was terrifying. She'd been living as Daniel's mother for months before he was even born. Your Honor, Janet interjected, I'd like to present evidence of Miss Rachel's extensive stalking behavior. She pulled out a laptop and began showing the judge the hundreds of photos Rachel had taken, not just of me, but of Josh, his parents, our house, our cars. There were spreadsheets documenting my daily routine, maps of routes I took to work, even detailed notes about what time I turned my bedroom lights off each night. This is the level of surveillance Miss Rachel has maintained for over 6 months. Janet explained. She's tracked this family's every movement, photographed them without consent, and created detailed profiles of their behavior patterns. The judge examined the evidence with growing alarm. Miss Rachel, can you explain this level of documentation? I wanted to make sure Daniel was being properly cared for, Rachel said defensively. A mother has a right to know how her child is being treated, but you are not this child's mother, the judge said firmly. Yes, I am, Rachel shouted, standing up so abruptly that she dropped the baby doll. It hit the floor with a hollow plastic sound that echoed through the silent courtroom. I am Daniel's mother. I chose his name. I planned his life. I love him more than anything in this world. Miss Rachel, please sit down, the judge ordered. But Rachel was beyond reason now. You don't understand. She was just supposed to carry him. It was never supposed to be permanent. Mom said it would be easy, that she'd hand him over when he was born, but then she got attached and now she thinks he's hers. She was unraveling completely, and I could see the bailiff moving closer, ready to intervene if necessary. I have his room ready, Rachel continued, tears streaming down her face. I have his clothes organized by size, his toys arranged by developmental stage. I know exactly what formula he should be eating, what schedule he should be on. I'm the one who researched the best pediatrician, the best daycare, the best schools. I'm his mother. The courtroom was dead silent, except for Rachel's ragged breathing. The judge looked at her with a mixture of pity and concern. "Miss Rachel, I'm ordering a psychiatric evaluation," he said gently. "You clearly need help." "I don't need help," Rachel said, her voice dropping to a whisper. "I need my son." That's when my mother stood up from the back of the courtroom where she'd been sitting silently. "Your Honor, if I may speak?" Janet objected, but the judge allowed it. "This is all my fault," Mom said, walking slowly toward the front of the court. "I should have stopped this months ago, but I hoped." She looked at Rachel with tears in her eyes. "Rachel, honey, I know how much you want a baby. We all do. But this isn't the way." "Mom, you promised," Rachel said, her voice breaking. "You said it would work. You said she'd understand." "I was wrong," Mom said simply. "I was so wrong, and I'm sorry. To all of you." She turned to address the judge. "My daughter Rachel has been struggling with infertility for years, and it's broken something inside her. When my other daughter got pregnant, I thought maybe we could work something out as a family. I never intended for it to go this far." "Mrs. Johnson," the judge said, "are you admitting that you helped forge legal documents and orchestrate harassment against your own daughter?" Mom's shoulders sagged. "Yes, Your Honor. I thought I was helping both my daughters, but I've destroyed our family instead." The judge was quiet for a long moment, studying all of us. When he finally spoke, his voice was firm and decisive. "I'm issuing a permanent restraining order against Miss Rachel Johnson and Mrs. Johnson, prohibiting any contact with the plaintiff's family or child. Miss Rachel's emergency custody petition is denied permanently. She may never file for custody of this child again." Rachel let out a wail that sounded barely human. "No, please, he needs me." "Furthermore," the judge continued, "I'm ordering both defendants to pay damages to cover the plaintiff's legal fees, moving expenses, and counseling costs. And Miss Rachel, you will undergo mandatory psychiatric treatment." As the bailiff moved to escort Rachel from the courtroom, she looked back at me one last time. "This isn't over," she said, but her voice held no threat anymore, only a broken woman's desperate plea. "Someday Daniel will want to know his real mother. Someday he'll come looking for me." I held Josh's hand tighter and looked down at Daniel sleeping peacefully in his carrier, blissfully unaware of the battle that had been fought over him. For the first time in months, I believed we might actually be free. 3 years have passed since that day in court. We moved across the country, changed our phone numbers, and started over completely. Josh found a great job with a tech company in Austin, and we bought a little house with a big backyard where Daniel can play safely. Daniel is now a happy, healthy 3-year-old who loves trucks, dinosaurs, and building blocks. He has no memory of the chaos that surrounded his birth, no knowledge of the family members who tried to claim him. To him, Josh and I are simply mom and dad, and his grandparents are the loving people who send him birthday cards and visit for holidays. But the scars remain. I still check over my shoulder when we're at the park. I still feel a flutter of panic when someone takes a photo of Daniel, even innocently. Josh installed security cameras around our new house, and we both find ourselves checking them obsessively when we're away. We've been to therapy, both individually and as a couple, to process what happened to us. The therapist says it was a form of psychological terrorism, that the constant threat and surveillance created trauma that may take years to fully heal. We've had no contact with my family since the court hearing. Mom and Rachel were both convicted of various charges related to the forged documents and harassment. Rachel spent 6 months in a psychiatric facility and is apparently doing better, though she still believes Daniel should have been hers. Dad sent one letter to our lawyer, asking if there was any way to rebuild our relationship. But how do you forgive people who tried to steal your child? How do you trust family members who turned your greatest joy into your worst nightmare? Sometimes I wonder if we'll ever feel completely safe. Last month, a woman at the grocery store commented on how much Daniel looks like her own grandson, and I found myself wondering if she was somehow connected to Rachel. It's an irrational fear, but trauma isn't rational. Josh worries about what we'll tell Daniel when he's older and starts asking questions about why he doesn't have aunts and uncles like other kids. How do you explain to a child that some people love so desperately that it becomes dangerous? But there are good days too. Days when Daniel laughs so hard at Josh's silly faces that I forget about the fear. Days when we have picnics in the backyard and I can just be a normal mom with a normal family. Days when the joy of being Daniel's parents outweighs the pain of what we went through to keep him. Last week, Daniel looked up at me while I was reading him a bedtime story and said, "Mama, I love you more than all the stars." And in that moment, I knew that everything we'd endured was worth it. Every sleepless night, every court appearance, every moment of terror, it was all worth it to protect this precious little boy who calls me Mama. Rachel was wrong about so many things, but she was right about one. Daniel did need his real mother. He just already had her. We've built a new life, surrounded by friends who've become our chosen family. Josh's parents visit regularly, and Daniel adores them. We've created the peaceful, loving home that we always dreamed of giving our son. Sometimes, in quiet moments, I think about the family we lost. I grieve for the relationship I once had with my mother, for the sister I thought Rachel was before her. Pain twisted her into someone unrecognizable. I wonder if things could have been different if we'd gotten Rachel proper help years earlier, before her desperation consumed her. But mostly, I focus on the family we saved: Josh, Daniel, and me. We survived something that could have destroyed us, and we came out stronger. We learned that love isn't always gentle, that family isn't always safe, and that sometimes protecting the people you love means fighting harder than you ever thought possible. Daniel is starting preschool next month. He's excited to make new friends and learn new things. He doesn't know that his parents will probably always be a little more protective than other parents, that will always be watching for threats that may never come. But he also doesn't know fear. He trusts completely, loves freely, and believes the world is a safe place because we've made sure his corner of it always is. And that's exactly how it should be. Our son will grow up knowing only love and security, never knowing how close he came to being stolen away by people who confused possession with love. In the end, that's all any parent wants: to give their child a life better than their own, to protect them from the darkness in the world, to love them so completely that they never doubt their worth. Rachel thought love meant taking what you want. But real love means giving everything you have to protect what matters most. And we'll never stop fighting to protect our son.